Look on his face when he looks in the pantry and it's completely bare.
I would do that. I would be.
I've been working all summer.
Yeah, verifying audio is not streaming, but now it is.
To stock up my larder, and now you have taken it away from me.
I mean, he kind of didn't have a choice about going on this adventure because they ate him out of house and home. What would he have been able to do?
Does anybody know if Brian and Richard are going to make it today?
Richard said something about, I don't know, he said something about having a cold and he didn't want to give it to you.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Was the way he put it. Now I'm not sure if
that's
that's
vulnerable right now.
I don't know exactly how that if it was quite that magnanimous of a reason, but let's take him at the.
Let's just assume it was.
No, I just take him at his word. So
okay.
Anyways, so
I don't have a. Huh. Usually Brian is very good about letting me know on that. He may have let me know and I forgot.
I would have let you know last night, but I forgot.
Okay. Well, Maria Gavanen, everyone. Welcome to the Tolkien Society, an official smile of the UK Tolkien Society. Broadcasting here live out of Spokane, Washington, US of A. Spokane, yes. On this September 16th, 2017. You'll have to forgive me that because it's Spokane, all the Northwest fires have the smoke levels through the roof, on and off. And I have asthma and everything, so I'm one of those vulnerable populations, and it's doing me in. So I have limited air capacity, and the breathing treatments that keep having me very dingy. So I'm gonna rely on you guys to do most of the talking if possible. I'll try to direct as best as possible.
Did you want the books I gave you last week? You obviously did you get around to looking at them?
Skimming, yes. Perusing, no.
Okay. Did we want to wait another month before we looked at that? Because it is kind of a hefty read because it is kind of a long essay on the author. I can't think of his name right now.
You're welcome to cover it anytime you want to discuss it.
Well, I kind of left it with you to decide what parts of it you wanted to.
I hope you weren't hurt when you fell, everyone viewing. So, and Brian wanted to borrow them as well.
Right. Well, Stephen Lawhead, I don't know if you know who he is, but yes.
Uh-oh.
An essay about J.R.R. Tolkien.
Now it's out of focus.
Stephen Lawhead is a known Christian author who doesn't seem to be very explicit about his Christianity in his novels. He's a well-known author. He wrote a little bit of Arthurian legend novels that are.
I have read all of.
Yes, and and he wrote his own. Anyways, he wrote an essay on Tolkien, and he says he's no scholar, but he just wishes to talk about the impact that Tolkien had on it.
We can totally discuss that today. However, we need to do our meeting notes first.
Right. I was just making it short.
Who has a copy of those?
I don't. I have the July one.
I'm sorry.
Not the August ones.
Oh, let me see. Maybe he sent them and I didn't post them. Everything going on.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't recall receiving notes from August.
I hope he sent them. Otherwise, my assumption is he sent them and I forgot to post them. Well, quickly, just first names. I'm Hawk Robinson, founder of the Tolkien Society here in Spokane, Inland Empire area.
I'm Stephanie.
Wesley.
Corey.
Chris.
And yeah, I have no idea what's going on with Brian. I hope he's okay. This is very unlike him. Well, okay. Why don't you guys bring up the topics you want while I see if I can find if there's any notes from last month.
I was just trying to give a plug of an overview of what the essay
Yeah,
is about, and
go
whether or
ahead.
not we should delve into it. I'm not sure how many pages it is, but it's not exactly short. Let's see.
If it's really long, what we do is we break it across several sessions. We'll do 10, 15 minutes of it out of the meeting, and then discuss that much, and then move on to other topics as well.
It's about 12 pages.
Yeah, we'll break that.
That's what I'm saying.
Let's break that down into like a page or three at a time, depending on excuse me, how heavy our commentary is.
Well, yeah. All right. Well, do you want me to start with that? Just reading.
Well, let's first check what other topics people would like to cover today.
Okay.
Any questions or content or excuse me.
Any burning ideas that have come up during the week that Tolkien is related to?
I can't think of any.
Well, his birthday, funeral, what was it? Just came by just this month, September.
Birthday and funeral at the same time?
No, not at the same time. That would be most unfortunate indeed. Okay, I know one of the two happened here. Let's see.
In September. Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's today.
Did his one would think that his funeral was closely tied to it would be unsurprising if it were tied to a motor vehicle.
He died,
accident.
yes, he died September 2nd, 1973, at the age of 81.
Did his wife pass away before he did?
Yes, she died in 71.
That would probably explain why he probably didn't outlive her for very long.
Right, no, that's very, very typical. So yeah, he was born January 3rd, 1892 in Bloemfontein, South Africa, and died in 1973.
He was born in South Africa.
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, you didn't catch
Wow,
that? The many references we made to that?
No, I didn't realize. Oh, when was?
Yes.
Because this was after.
Well, 1892.
This before apartheid, the Boer War. I'm trying to think.
Yeah. Well, so his father was a bank manager, and so he had a job there running a bank in Bloemfontein. And then at some point, when he was a number of years old, the father sent the family to
He was like
England.
4 or something? He was quite
Fairly
young,
young,
right?
yes, quite young.
So he probably doesn't remember too
So
much.
he received a proper British education.
And yet he said that he did
So
not enjoy
when
the
his
English
father,
literature.
his father died of complications from rheumatic fever. So his mother settled them when Tolkien was 4 years old. Everybody called him Ronald at that time. And his younger brother Hilary in the country hamlet of Sarehole in Birmingham, England. So that's where they were.
So
initially.
his father passed away in South Africa. Is that what is
Yes.
implied? Then?
Yes. And his mother died in 1904. So about 1896, his father died. 1904, his mother died. So they went to stay with relatives and in boarding homes, and with a Catholic priest who took guardianship in Birmingham. And then that's when he went on to Exeter College and everything else. So yeah, these are all in all of his biographies.
So I couldn't remember the date, but it's, I guess the 22nd is Hobbit Day?
Yeah, I believe so. I saw
Coming up.
something. Let's see.
Bilbo and Frodo's birthday.
Right. Yes.
22nd.
So multiple significant events in September.
Your birthday.
And it was my birthday on 9/11.
Mine was 9/12. Yours is
That my girlfriend's 9/12.
Nice.
Yeah, this is right after. Yeah. So we celebrated ours this past weekend.
Don't you love it when the people just constantly remind you of all the tragedy that happened on your birthday?
Most people are not bothered. Only my boys have really done that. So every now and then it's like, oh, I'm sorry, but that's about it.
I'm just kidding. It's just such a big thing in the American consciousness.
Chris, did you have topics you'd like to cover this time
Not
around?
particular. Well,
Okay.
I'll be even
That's it's going to be rough if everybody decides to be the gallery and I can't speak well. Of course, we all can always read from letters. We can figure out where we left off at. Well, then, Court, why don't you go ahead and cover the topic you wanted while I continue to dig through here.
Well, okay. I'll just go ahead and read. I think.
Yeah, read a paragraph and then stop and see if there's anything anybody wants to comment on, and then the next paragraph. And then we usually like to rotate between people reading for those who wish to. It's always a challenge by choice. If you don't wish to read, just pass it on to the next person.
Well, how about I just cover the first two paragraphs? That'll cover the first page because it's very short, and then I'll pass it on to somebody else. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any August meeting notes from Brian. I just have from July.
Well, because he came at the very end of the thing, at very end of our sessions. Remember,
Okay.
it was just me and you for
Right.
the first hour, and
Oh,
then
well, that's unfortunate. Okay.
You didn't take notes?
I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
did
we're
not.
so used to Brian doing such a great job, but I've fallen out of the habit.
I'm gonna have to
I've
start
fallen out of
learning.
the Hobbit. It has to be done.
That's terrible.
Has to be done. All right, go ahead there, Corey.
So this is Stephen Lawhead. He lives in Oxford. I should probably read that. He's a mythic. He's a writer of mythic history and imaginative fiction. He authored a couple of children's books, some science fiction which did not go well, and some fantasy novels that are well known. He's originally from Nebraska, but he made his home in Oxford, England, with his wife, Alice, and I don't know how to pronounce her name because it's a Celtic middle name, and Lawhead.
Then spell it.
S-Laikeu. Sleiku? I don't know.
You know, that could be it. It could be Slachu or something.
So not only did he...
Katie would know. She actually knows Gaelic.
Not only did a little Arthurian legend, but he did some Celtic fantasy writing. Anyways, I discovered, he entitles it Tolkien, Master of Middle-earth. I just discovered J.R.R. Tolkien in exactly the same way as millions of other admirers through the pages of The Lord of the Rings. I was a college student at the time, teaching an 8th grade art class when I noticed one of my students, a shy, overweight kid with an intellectual bent, coming to school early to pore over these thick paperbacks. At the time, I was only dimly aware of this fantasy trilogy or its author, but they had already won legions of devoted fans around the world. Certainly, the devotion that boy lavished on those books bordered on the fanatical. Every spare moment he labored over reams of the most intricate and exotic script. Runes, he told me. Or he practiced one of the 11 languages he learned from the books. He was so enthralled with the story that he even taught himself to speak Elf. Would you like me to continue, or should I pass it on?
Any comments on your experiences and similar, different, contrast, compare?
8th grade, no, it was younger than that, 1st grade, but then I reread in high school a second time.
And Corey, when were you introduced to The Hobbit?
My mother introduced me to The Hobbit. She said it was amazing. It's funny, but all the science fiction I get is from my mother's side of the family. And what's funny is she doesn't seem to be that deeply into science fiction, but she got me involved in reading The Hobbit at a very young age. So I think it was middle school age.
I think that was high school.
What? How did you get introduced?
My dad liked it when I was younger, and then I didn't like reading very much when I was younger than high school. But then I think it was the movies. They were coming out, so I was like, oh, I should read this.
Okay.
So I read them. I had read, I think, The Fellowship, and then I wasn't super interested. And then the movies were coming out. I was like, okay, I'll read them all.
So you read The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings first?
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't see you. Boy, that's a bit of a, that's, yeah, for
Yeah. I'm not sure why I did it in that order. I just didn't know better. Apparently I don't read books in the right order ever. Done that before.
How about yourself?
Yeah, I read The Hobbit when I was younger. I don't remember when I read The Lord of the Rings the first time through, but I mean, the part about the kid teaching himself the languages stuck out to me, but I never got that deeply into it.
Here's the valid language for issue.
Okay.
Alright.
Good advertising now.
Where's that coming from?
But there's kids that I've seen in school have doodled with elf scripts and things. So I know there are kids who are interested in that stuff.
I didn't really know that elf was a full language until college, and I bought a book that's not very accurate, but I wanted to try to
Was it
figure
the
out.
red book?
Yeah, probably.
Oh yeah, that was really lambasted.
But-
really bad.
But I wanted to. I was so entranced with the idea that he had a full language that you could actually speak.
They have, was it 3 different?
Was it this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. This one's lambasted as terrible
It's a
as a
dictionary.
resource.
All 14 of the languages
Yes.
Tolkien invented. Wait, how many Elvish languages did he have?
He had
Three.
Okay.
3 Elvish.
And then wait, what were all the other ones? How many were like?
Well, he did a lot of Dwarvish.
He
but
did
it never finished.
Dwarvish, he did Numenorian, he did Orcish. Let's probably list the languages.
Were they?
He created 19 languages in total, not complete languages, but
Yeah.
including the first one he did with his brother Hillary, which was animist or something like that. It was their animal tongue that they did initially.
Which is funny to think about. How he started that young.
Well, actually, that's not so strange.
Yeah.
Friends and I did things like that. You make your own codes, and and culturally, you see just youth always do that. They're always the '60s. You had the hip language and whatever, and whatever subculture always creates their own little thing that tries to differentiate themselves from previous generations. So permutations of it are not unusual. The fact that they went full blown animalist, whatever, was remarkable. 'Cause
Yeah,
he was
that's-
interested in words even then at a young age.
Do you know if for that language did he just say, oh, instead of bear, let's say, bleh. Like did he keep the same grammar as English or?
I think they were working on their own. I really don't know the details on that one.
Because he learned several other languages as a child.
Oh, he
right?
learned-
like real languages, not just made up ones.
Well, more as an adult, I think.
Oh.
But he learned. But he had an affinity for Welsh because of being kind of in that area for a while. And later Finnish, and Finnish is what the Elvish languages are. Welsh and Finnish, and such. There's quite a mix of that, but heavily Finnish and let's see. This hopefully is accurate. It says his mother introduced him to Latin, French, and German. So until she died. At school, he taught himself. He was either taught or taught himself Greek, Middle English, Old English, aka Anglo-Saxon. Old Norse, also called Old Icelandic, Gothic, Modern and Medieval Welsh, Finnish, Spanish, and Italian.
This is what
Other languages of which he had working knowledge included Russian, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Dutch, and Lombardic. I don't even know what Lombardic is. Anybody know what that is? Quick Google for that.
It sounds. I can't. It's on the tip of my tongue, but you probably could look it up quicker than me.
Yeah. So, let's see. I believe I read that he had like 19 or 14 to 19 is kind of the debated, depending on how far you take it. Let's see.
the extinct language of the Lombards, Germanic-speaking people who settled in Italy 6th century and changed by the 7th century because it died, I would say, because the invaders quickly adopted Latin as it was.
I kind of feel like I ended the reading in the middle of something important, but do to move on. I want to just finish up. He actually has a stopping point here in the middle of the page.
Okay, but I didn't interject my experience as well.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, of course we want to.
So I actually was a little later on the Tolkien introduction. It was I remember reading pretty early, but not voraciously. I remember doing a book report on the atom, friend or foe, in 3rd grade, about nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and such. And reading in 4th and in 5th grade, fell in love with 4th, 5th grade, fell in love with the Walter Farley Black Stallion series. Their horse adventures, and I used to train horses and be involved with a lot. So I read, there were like 32 books, I read them voraciously. But I remember like 3rd, 4th grade reading the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and all that, but it was just kind of a little bit here and there. Started to read a lot in 5th grade, and then a friend in 6th grade introduced me to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And that was, that opened up the whole world of fantasy. And although I never took to science fiction as much. I mean, some of it like Dune and stuff I enjoyed, but really fantasy. And B. Dalton and Walden books were around then, and I read every fantasy book they had on the shelf. Because I would read a book in 2-3 days, and sometimes 2 or 3. I'd rotate through it, have one in this room and one over here. And so by the time, read those, and I tried Silmarillion towards the end of 6th grade, couldn't get through it. Tried again in 8th grade, did get through it, but didn't really get it. Tried again, I don't know, 9th or 10th grade, it was starting to click. But talking about languages, by 8th grade, I was getting fairly proficient in writing both the Agarthas, which are the runes that he's talking about, the structural runes, and the Elvish script. The name
Tengwar.
Tengwar, yeah, I think the Tengwar. Well, there's two. There's 2 different ones. So I learned both scripts. One I was more proficient than the other. So I could read and write both of those fairly proficiently, and I could speak it a little bit, but it was more internally that I could read and write it. I even decorated I played basketball, and my high tops I eventually decorated in Agarthas and runes and everything, and permanent marker and stuff. They were white high tops, there was a lot of room. My big feet. And but no, other than my friend who introduced me to it, he did not go to that level, so I didn't really have anybody to dialogue with in any of it, so I was just doing my own thing with that. But that would have been a little later. My boys, introduced to The Hobbit, of course, very, very young, reading to them, and then they each read it on their own somewhere between 1st and 3rd grade. And then Lord of the Rings.
Being that The Lord of the Rings is so grounded in substance and reality, and the fact that the language is complete kind of makes, I think, us younger people be like, this isn't just some daydream that we're living, that it's almost like it's a parallel dimension that Tolkien was recording.
Right, which is what he tried to do.
Anyways,
right,
I just wanted to finish because
he's
talking to this kid about The Lord of the Rings. You should read these books, Mr. Lawhead. He said he'd say when he comes to show me his latest runic epistle. J.R.R. Tolkien is the greatest author who ever lived. To be honest, his endorsement steered me away from the books for a good long time. I am contrary that way. Let anyone praise a thing too highly, and I make tracks in the opposite direction. It wasn't until seminary a few years later that I picked up a copy of The Fellowship of the Ring. Probably I was supposed to be reading homiletics or hermeneutics or something of similar weight, but boredom and curiosity finally got the better of me. In fact, my head was so full of massive profundity of seminary study that old J.R.R. Tolkien came across as a gulp of fresh air to a man drowning in mud. His tale of hobbits and magic rings in a world inhabited by orcs, elves, dwarves, wizards, and dragons proved a perfect antidote to the arid drear of Old Testament hagiography. Within the pages of his remarkable book, people lived and struggled and died, an entire universe of them. The Tolkien trilogy quickly became my bedtime reading, doled out in carefully measured nightly doses. I savored each and every syllable of that shining prose. I have always been an avid reader. Some of my best friends are books. But until I cracked the cover of Professor Tolkien's classic, I had never encountered a book of such splendid magnitude, such grace, such scope and wholeness of vision, and all of it was seamless, unforced, genuine, and extremely entertaining. Well, it made an impact. Although I was never moved to communicate in runes or begin babbling in high elf, I learned a lasting lesson about the nature of storytelling. Through the long, elegant movements of the Lord of the Rings, I grasped the structure of the epic and something of the interplay of story elements and the force of narrative. More, I began to understand the enormous power of fiction to speak to the heart and soul of the reader, to lift the spirit, to ennoble and challenge and inspire. So he came to it late in life and
a bit resistant.
A bit resistant, and
which means a more critical viewpoint.
Kicking and screaming, as it were.
Well, I think he, as many of us did, we didn't know what to say, and once we were there, I don't think we grasped the magnitude of what we were reading at the time, though we enjoyed it.
Chris, do you want to read the next paragraph or two?
Right here.
I want to talk about that a little bit more.
Please,
Okay,
go ahead, please.
I really wonder what we would think of the book if we read it when it was brand new, like if we were reading it as it was a new novel, and if we read The Hobbit the same way. Because right now, I went into it knowing it was a classic, and so I was really, I didn't really get that into it because it was a classic, because everyone said so many good things. So it was sort of like that guy, where everyone was saying great things, so obviously I'm not going to like it. I mean, I did like it, but I think I would have liked it more if not so many people had told me that I would like it.
It's kind of like classic English literature. The people are always saying, you need to read this book, you need to read this book. Yeah, yes, and you need to sit down and do that. And then you're like, you sit down and you
Iliad and Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes a chore, and you're like, why am I reading this?
Yeah, my expectations were so high that I think I did a little disservice.
Interesting.
So if I had gone in with like, no, it's going to be terrible, it's a new book, who cares, it's some weird author that I've never heard of before, I wonder if I would have...
Yeah, I had no preconceptions of it. I'd never read a fantasy adventure or fantasy book.
But had you heard, like, oh,
not
this
really.
is supposed to be basic?
No, this would have been back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, okay.
I was not in the whole fantasy geek culture thing. I'm uber geek now.
How'd you fall into it?
As I said, a friend in 6th grade
Oh,
recommended I check it out, who was into it. But he just said, oh, well, I'd run out of books, and I'd read all of this area.
You've run out of books.
In this area, and again, it beat all the Walden books, they had a limited size.
So it was just like, you might like this.
Exactly. Like, oh, try this. I'm like, all right, I've never read anything like that, but okay.
That seems to me why Lawhead's experience seems to connect more with people of this age, because they've seen the movies, and they've people talked about Lord of the Rings way before they probably have ever experienced the books.
Well, what's funny is I'd actually been doing role-playing gaming before I read Lord of the Rings. A lot of people it's the other way around, or The Hobbit or any of that. I had been introduced to that when I was 9 years old by a cousin, and totally took off of that, but did not know the Tolkien connection at all until when I was reading. Now, like, wait a minute. But yeah, I didn't have that kind of pushback against people telling me what to read, which I can understand. I can understand the contrariness personally as well. I waited a long time before I tried reading George R.R. Martin, because everybody's like, you gotta read this, you gotta read this. No, I don't. I don't have to. I can go on perfectly fine in my life without reading it. At some point, I might choose to read this. And I did, and I'm not that impressed with George R.R. Martin. I'm just like, I think he's kind of long-winded, but he has some interesting stories to tell, but he's kind of taking forever to finish his point. Not as bad as Robert Jordan, but which I couldn't finish after the 5th or 6th book. I just I can't do this
Well,
anymore.
while the
I only have
distance
so many hours in my life.
while the distance between Tolkien and us is great, it's funny how people still enjoy Tolkien's the generation.
Yes,
distance.
generation after generation.
Right, like there's like a 2-generation gap between us and Tolkien, and yet what's funny is if I were to go and read like, I don't know, Jane Eyre or something, I have a harder time reading Jane Eyre than I do reading Tolkien's. Obviously it's farther in generations, but I feel like Tolkien seems more I don't relatable. I don't
Accessible.
know.
Well, it's a more modern language.
Well,
I mean, just
true, but
generationally that is different.
But I feel like he's not like, I mean, he's intelligent, but you don't feel bogged down in feeling like he's over the top.
I met plenty of people who have tried to they do okay with The Hobbit. When they get to The Lord of the Rings, they really don't care for it. I've met a lot of people who just like, I just don't like, I like the movies, I don't like the Lord of the Rings, the books. And I'm just like, oh, blasphemer! What are you? No, I'm like, okay. And especially the most common thing I hear is around the middle of Two Towers, because it's all travel and description, and he isn't really moving the story. He's showing you the world that he has in his head. And a lot of people get stuck there. A lot of people do not get past some part of the Two Towers. I met a lot of people that said, yeah, I said I thought it was great, I kind of like that, got the Two Towers, and it just got really boring. And other people was like, oh, I couldn't stop, it was a page turner. My ex-wife, when she finally read it, because it was kind of the same thing, you know, I had been doing gaming and Tolkien and all this forever, and she knew that, but she'd been kind of resistant because I kept saying, oh, you gotta read it. She read The Hobbit, she really liked it. So she binge read The Hobbit, and I let her, like, I totally took care of the kids while she just sat on the couch and read, like 3 days, she read through all 4 books, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and all of it. And she was like in tears about Frodo, and just was, because she binge read it, she had this incredibly strong emotional experience with it that I did not have that strong an experience. But I didn't binge read it the first time, right? And at least not anymore my normal binge reading. So, yeah, and, you know, your mileage will vary. Everybody's going to have a different experience. With the youngest generation right now that's coming on into this, of course, we have lower literacy rates in the U.S. at least. So there's now more language struggle. The Hobbit less so, but Lord of the Rings is a higher language capacity. You have my girlfriend is a tech writer, and previously Microsoft, now AT&T, and they're told repeatedly to write to a 4th grade level. It used to be 9th grade.
It used to be 8th grade in my tech writing classes.
Yeah.
In 1996.
Right, and yeah, and she's got a master's in English. She used to teach at Seattle U and all this. And their mandate, she keeps getting in trouble for writing at too high a level. They're like, oh, your English literature is showing, or something like that. And so they had to go as low as 4th grade level for their stuff. That's where where it's become. And our generation, it was 8th, 9th plus grade. At least it was that, sad as that is. All 3 of my boys by 3rd, 4th grade were 12.9 on reading level. And I think a lot of, because of, they fell in love with reading that grades as young. We just ran one of our games yesterday at the Spark Central, which is a community center here, and Adventures in Middle Earth, and went really, really well. The volunteers, 2 of them said they were in tears about what they saw happening with the kids, how they just were lighting up and interacting at a level they never saw them before, because these kids are on the computers and not interacting with each other in the same way, and not having the same attention span, and all these other variables that happen. You know, I'm a tech background. I totally support tech, but I think that's being balanced with everything else. And I do see the consequences of a multimedia world. It is so much easier to just watch the videos and TV and such, although they don't watch TV, it's all online, than to read a book. And you can multitask it more, which just makes the ADHD-like symptoms even worse, because you're not single focus. You know, I'm as guilty of, but I have ADHD, so that's my excuse. But so, when did he write that exactly? When was that essay written?
Oh, very recently. It was part of an essays actually edited by Philip Yancey, who is a big name in Christian inspiration books.
2002. Okay.
It's been.
So
quite
that's
recent.
one. Believe it or not, that's one generation back. About a little less than one generation.
Yeah.
20 years for a generation.
Still, I find that he's one of the few authors I've actually read that.
Millennials are just little babies then, weren't even reading yet.
But I do find a number of millennials that do read Lawhead's books, so that's the reason why I find it.
Well, and what is nice is the movies have made people read the books.
Right.
That wouldn't have otherwise. So that's good. That's a whole other generation that's been turned on to it. But by far, I'm meeting a lot more people now who have seen the movies and have not read the books, whereas pre-Hobbit, so the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings stuff, a lot more people had seen movies and then read the books, or read the books and seen the movies. With the Hobbit being so much later, very few of these kids have read the Hobbit. They've seen the movie, disservice that it did, being a video game, basically, and did not read the books. All these kids that were down here at Spark Central, not one of them read any of the books. They've all seen the movies. And they were excited because it was like, oh, cool! And they wanted to be wizards throwing fireballs, all this other stuff. Like, no. Middle-earth magic's a little more subtle.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing is that Tolkien had written the Silmarillion earlier, but the Hobbit was really disconnected, and he really didn't do the Hobbit. Technically wasn't really part of anything until the Lord of the Rings.
Well, he went back and worked it into.
He took essentially the Hobbit and absorbed it into the Silmarillion story, and then produced.
Yeah, he had later versions to fit into his.
So the Hobbit, in some ways, were never really connected to Middle Earth. I mean, very vaguely, but
not the big picture. Yeah.
Because the goblins were not quite orcs, and there's a very different tone to the.
It's a lighter tone. It definitely was for a younger. If you read the review from the son of the publisher about this would be totally appropriate for children. You know, he's like 14. He's like, this would be totally appropriate for an 8 or 9-year-old. The younger, you know, it was so funny to have a teenager's review on that. Kind of give a little, yes, well, it's a little beneath me, but they might enjoy this very much. And, you know, it's worked for all ages. Any other commentary before we read the next couple paragraphs on that?
Is he writing this essay in response to movies coming out?
No, he wrote this essay. This is a whole bunch of essays about authors that influenced them
Prior to
and how they encountered these authors. So they were given a specific author that they felt was very impactful in their specific genre, and they were explaining how they encountered that person and how it influenced their life. He says he's no scholar, but he's just saying how Tolkien kind of entered his world and how it impacted him in the way he writes.
So the book was published in 2002, but was the essay written just for the book? I mean, was that written in 2002?
Right. It was written on a conversation of essentially, you know, kind of like the mentors, kind of like C.S. Lewis admired, what's his name? Very preachy.
George McDonald?
Yeah, George McDonald. C.S. Lewis. Imagine if C.S. Lewis was told, "Hey, give us an essay on George McDonald and explain how you encountered him." You know, that's kind of what he's doing.
As Tolkien was asked to write a preface to the new revision of George McDonald, and so he went because he had been such a fan of George McDonald.
This is crap.
Then he went back and reread it and went, "Oh, this sucks! I can't stand this," and then wrote his own version with
Smith.
Yeah, Smith Wood Major. Yes.
But the difference here is that I don't think that Lawhead admires Tolkien, but I don't think he sees him as a father like C.S. Lewis saw McDonald.
Oh, yeah.
He's admiring the fact that Tolkien is essentially the guy that brought fantasy into the world and
as we know it.
And the Christian viewpoint that was implicit in his writing was something that he feels is important. But anyways, you can keep reading and
Okay. These things I learned, and the learning went deep, I think. At least it went underground for a season. For the next years saw me at Campus Life magazine, mastering what I could of the writing craft. I rarely thought about Tolkien's books during that time, nor did I think seriously about fiction, and hobbits hardly ever entered my conversation. But the seed that Tolkien's books had sown was germinating. There in the moist, fertile darkness of my subconscious, or wherever these things sprout, the first notions of writing the sort of books I loved reading began to take root. About this same time, I discovered the Inklings, quite by accident as it happened. While researching an article about Tolkien for Campus Life, I picked up a copy of Humphrey Carpenter's biography of the professor. The author described the importance in Tolkien's life of the literary friends, a fairly informal group of Oxford academics of one sort or another, who went by the name of the Inklings.
well, at the time, Humphrey Carpenter was like the only one who had written a biography at the time.
It's an authorized biography, so he gets to tell, he gets access to a lot of stuff, right? That no one else gets.
Right.
That's not, yeah.
So, let's see. Having enjoyed Tolkien's books, I tracked down and read some of the work of some of the other Inklings, C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams especially. I enjoyed the books, but in the end, it wasn't the Inklings' work that moved me. It was the informing spirit of their work, a spirit which I began to sense they all shared. What was this particular spirit? I was content to wonder about this in my own slow way, gathering bits and pieces of it whenever and wherever they popped up, salting them away in my private cache. Then, one day, a few years later, I sat down at the typewriter to write a book. It was, for the first time in my life, completely free to write whatever I liked. That is to say, I was unemployed. So he, I suppose, had some free time on his hands and had a typewriter.
Wow.
Well, see, the second you said you read that biography, that there was something in it that was like exclusively that biography, and you were like, why is this, how is this known if it's supposed to be exclusive with this? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
No, there's
Humphrey Carpenter, I think, actually, there's a few people that actually met Tolkien. I'm not sure if Humphrey Carpenter, did he actually meet Tolkien?
Yeah.
And there was bits and pieces of personal interaction, because Humphrey was around when Tolkien was still alive, I think.
Have
And
you
that's the
guys
reason
watched
why-
the video clips of Tolkien being interviewed?
No.
It's really a must. It's on YouTube easily. You can find links on our Tolkien Scholars website as well. Because you read about him and you read his writing and such, but to actually hear him talking in his distinctive way. So a lot of students of his spoke about how his intro, for example, Anglo-Saxon, was to, from memory, recite Beowulf. Right? It just do it very dramatically and such. But the way he gives lectures is in a monotone run-on, run-on sentences,
Like me.
and then he kind of meanders off on other tangents. He's in his own head.
Yeah.
He's like sharing, he's doing the lecture, but he was an extremely difficult professor to follow. It was really hard to keep notes because he was just all over the place and rambled and mumbled a lot and would speak very, very quickly, quick spurts that were impossible to keep up with. He was not an ideal teacher as far as that. He had great information, but it was hard to follow. So you kind of get a taste of that when you see the interviews. because he just kind of goes, blah, 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 blah. And it's great, but you can see how that would be really tough to deal with that as an instructor who was like that. But it's also neat because there's also readings of him, and I have them on CD and record, vinyl, of both Christopher Tolkien and his father reading in Elvish and reading passages from the different books and such. Silmarillion, Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, just excerpts from each of them. Well worth seeking out and hearing in their versions. And Christopher Tolkien, of course, helped his father with so much of it that he's a pretty good resource to hear him recite. And he's easier to follow than his father.
For as few years as we have left.
Yes, he's 90-something now.
Who's in the 90s?
Christopher Tolkien.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's why he said this last book.
Was going to be the last one.
Maybe his last.
Maybe, yeah. He claims it will be his last. So, and who could blame him? I mean, he has waded through all of that stuff.
I mean, McCaffrey stopped writing at about 90. But she was mentoring 4 or 5 other writers to write her style all the way up until her death.
Wait, who did she mentor?
Is that not Anne McCaffrey, the
Yes.
Greg Wright Byrne?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember.
I like her first few books. I just,
I love them all.
yeah, I can't remember how many I read. I liked them when I read them. I just don't remember how many.
That was an approachable series then.
Was approachable?
Yes.
That was it? Yeah. I didn't read that in the right order though.
I swallowed
see it.
most of them like my mother just as soon as they came out on the library shelves. We had them.
Nice.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Wait, so are they other like well-known authors that she mentored?
I am trying to remember. I know one of them is a relation.
Is that relation like Todd McCaffrey?
Yes.
Oh. I don't like him as much.
No.
But I was hoping her mentorship would be like other authors that are like actually her style, not just her world.
Trying to get somebody to mimic style.
She mentored. This is from a Elizabeth N. Scarborough, Mercedes Lackey, and Jody Lynn Nye.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I don't know any of them.
Oh, Mercedes Lackey is good.
Yeah, well,
Right.
yeah, interesting. I've read it a long time ago.
Yeah, I like some of her stuff.
I've been stuck the last 20 years either tech books or psychology, therapy, rec therapy books. My free time is so limited on fun reading, unfortunately. But
On a note, okay, so Todd McCaffrey was finishing some of Ian McCaffrey's stuff. Christopher Tolkien's finishing some of his dad's stuff.
Yeah.
On an unrelated note, Terry Pratchett,
yeah,
he requested that no one finishes his stuff, that all of his unfinished manuscripts be destroyed.
what?
So
Whoa!
whoever he entrusted with that took the hard drive from his computer recently and
That's
had to work
correct.
really hard to find
That's correct.
steamroller, yeah, a steamroller to run it over. So they like had a literal steamroller
Jeez.
run over a hard drive to destroy it, which I'm sad and happy about. I'm happy that no one will try to mimic his style with his stories and not do as good of a job, but then also I want more of his stories, so.
Well, the thing is that it's really, really hard for another author to come in because there's just such a huge portion of the person that's involved in the writing that it's their style, their unique personality, the way they think about things that come up. I mean, how you write a story, it uses such a holistic part of you. I mean, it's not just some small part of you. That's really hard to have somebody come in and really find the seed of the story and then make sure it grows in the right direction.
Well, so Robert Jordan, the Wheel of Time series, they had his wife with Sanderson, yeah, right, who's been here at Spokane a number of years.
Sanderson tried really
he did,
hard.
he did some workshops and everything, writing workshops that my youngest son attended that he really loved. He's a big Brandon Sanderson fan, and he actually got to meet him and go to his workshops, and so that was a lot of fun for him. Because Drake, my youngest, is an aspiring writer. And he's written some interesting stuff. He did his first little 80,000 word novelette. He like spent a summer. I covered him going to this when he was 13 or so, going to Starbucks, and I gave him just enough money to go hang out at Starbucks, and he would go and write a minimum 2,500 words, something like that, before he allowed himself to leave. He usually do triple that, whatever. But so he spent weeks during the summer just writing his thing and stuck to it. That was great.
So I was thinking one more page and then we'll be done.
Okay.
I want to get to kind of the funny part because he finally decides to write, and I could kind of sum it up. He's broke, and he decides to write, and he has a family, and he needs to make some money. It kind of sounds like Tolkien situation sometimes. He talks about striking off into uncharted territory by starting a new novel. And so what did I write when I settled down before the keyboard that day? The answer is obvious. I said to myself, I shall write a masterwork of heroic fiction after the style of The Hobbit. Indeed, I shall swathe myself in the mantle of the beloved Tolkien and become an author of massive fantasy novels. What is more, the example of the Inklings will become my constant inspiration and my guiding light. As much as I might like to remember it that way, the truth is a good deal less high-flown, utterly mundane, in fact. I really have no idea what I would do that first day. I simply went into my bedroom office and sat down at the desk, rolled a piece of yellow paper into the typewriter, and began typing. If I gave thought at all to what I wanted to do, it was simply to write the best and most entertaining story I could. That is, to write a book that I myself would like to read. I figured that if I liked the books, then I'd have pleased at least one person. I did not think in terms of fantasy. I did not think in terms of great literature. I did not think in terms of Tolkien. I set out to please myself. Tolkien didn't enter into it. Now, many people find that extremely odd. I know because Now, many people find that extremely odd. I know because I run into these people all the time. They approach me assuming that since I've written a fantasy book or two, I must have a Tolkien shrine in my living room, for which I prostrate myself daily. They assume I carry photos of C.S. Lewis in my wallet and that I've named my children Clive and Bilbo. And I must, they think, have committed to memory whole passages of The Hobbit and can recite the entire Chronicles of Narnia upon request. It disappoints them to learn the shabby truth. I keep no shrine. I own no autographed first editions. My children do not have a Frodo or Staples between them. I couldn't repeat a scrap of Dawn Treader to save my scalp. I've never smoked a pipe. Yet the lessons I learned from Lewis and Tolkien penetrated deep into my psyche, deeper than emulation, deeper than imitation. In short, it was not Tolkien's style or subject matter that influenced me. It was the integrity of the work itself.
So that always brings to mind my little pet peeve about all fantasy authors that get compared or compare themselves to Tolkien. And the pet peeve is not one of them started with language first. Unless you start with language first, you are not doing it the same way that Tolkien did it at all. Everybody focuses on the end product, not on the evolution of how it got there, which is he started with languages first, then needed a place for those words to evolve and have a purpose and meaning. It wasn't that he started with the stories. That's everybody else tries to create languages for their world, but and put it into the world they've already started to write.
Well, it's kind of like when Jordan came out with his series, and on the cover was somebody's quote. This is the new.
Well, George R. R. Martin. They do the same thing, George R. R. Martin and stuff.
And I always laugh because I feel like they they obviously don't realize what they're saying.
Well,
I mean, maybe they do. They want a specific impact.
It's a surface comparison of fantasy, high fantasy, epic, whatever.
So the light bulb just went on.
Yes.
Bill Gates
Yes.
started with language first.
Ouch! No! No! Oh my goodness, no! Because he did the Altair basic compiler.
Basic. And
You're evil, man.
and Amiga Basic as a contract.
He did Amiga Basic?
Did Amiga Basic as a contract. Look at it.
Oh no! No! I have a running Amiga 2000. These are computers.
I have just ruined Pock's world.
No! Say it isn't so! Oh, that's you're evil, man. That's just a little techie humor. Wow. Yeah, what are you saying? So one of the first big contracts that Bill Gates got in his founding of Microsoft, when it was pretty much himself. And
I think it was before Microsoft.
yeah, before they really were a company, is there was this early primitive computer. It was mostly just switches and lights that you could build. It was a kit computer called the Altair 1000. It was in the 70s. And it didn't have a language to compile it, like in all its capacity, capabilities, but no language to like make programs for it. And so he took on the challenge of creating a basic compiler so that you could write basic to make programs for it. And this is through a paper tape type feed-in type system. I mean, this is old school stuff. And that is a laborious, difficult, very technical process to do that effectively. So that was kind of how he got into the industry and then kind of took off.
And from there,
right.
The entire
then he went and bought DOS.
Yeah, I know.
Out of Seattle for $50K.
Yeah.
Thanks to his mother's connections with IBM and stuff, they then got their foot in the door with IBM PCs. Lovable. All right. But yeah, that is an evil comparison, man.
Tolkien though is an unusual thing because you don't see a whole lot of people running around going, "You're the next Herbert." Herbert.
I was going to say about Frank Herbert. His son Brian did take over, and people keep telling me, I haven't read his son's versions, but people keep telling me Brian was a better writer than his father. And I don't know if that's true. I
like Brian's better, but I don't know that they were. I think they were different in style. I don't think it was better.
But people keep saying they liked Brian's better.
All I'm trying to say is that you don't see too many genres that are sitting around comparing themselves to a specific figure in the past, but you see Tolkien is like the guy who initiated all this. Kind of in some ways, he took what wasn't really fantasy at the time. It was more mythology and some fairy tales, and he turned it into what is now a lot of modern fantasy. And there's a lot of fantasy writers that are just constantly going back to him. And for some reason, he's this looming figure in fantasy. But what other figure has the same shadow, I guess you could say,
I would
as
disagree.
Tolkien?
Yeah, I would disagree that it doesn't have in other genres. I mean, you see it in science fiction all the time. The latest Asimov, the latest, here's Anthony.
I just don't hear so much about Asimov as much in the science fiction as...
see it on the books all the time. Some critics somewhere keep making those comparisons. Or in Westerns, the latest Louis L'Amour.
But when did Asimov come out, though? When did Asimov come out?
I don't know, 50s?
I feel like that Asimov's shadow has faded, and Tolkien's is still very strong. It's still holding on, and influences a great portion of...
Asimov's in every sci-fi show that has to do with Earth and...
But every time I read something like Terry Brooks, or you read, or even when people comment on Jordan, like we were talking about Jordan and so on, unless you're really trying to break away from the mold, there seems to be so many derivatives of people who want this epic fantasy that Tolkien somehow was able to create this very in-depth world.
There's a big anti-Tolkien movement too, though. There's a lot of people who go, anything that looks like Tolkien, they rip it apart as being derivative and not original, derivative, not original. Like, you know, it's all derivative.
Well,
Asimov started writing for Pulp magazine in the 1920s.
Wow.
So, and that would have also, and I swear I read something from Tolkien about, because Tolkien did read a little bit of sci-fi stuff. Of course, he did his attempt at sci-fi as a challenge from Lewis and the others with his time travel version of the Numenorians, with the Lost Tales and things like that. Tolkien did do sci-fi. He was not
right, but him and Lewis were not very good at sci-fi. I always felt.
Well, Brian, I know would disagree on that. He loves the Silent Planet series.
Well, it has a lot of symbolic meaning, but I don't know that I would consider it sci-fi. It seems to border more along a fantasy version of
it's sci-fi.
Because back in those days, because they didn't know much about Mars, they just kind of filled it in with these kind of mythological ideas.
The science is bogus. It's still sci-fi. I mean, because otherwise you're throwing out the whole sci-fi genre of the 1880s to the 1930s.
I felt like C.S. Lewis wasn't so much a sci-fi writer, but he was more of a fantasy writer that was trying to do sci-fi. Because I never found that
I know a lot of C.S. Lewis fans would totally disagree with you on that one.
Well, I never felt endeared.
Let him talk about it.
You disagree?
I will disagree.
Okay, I apologize.
Here's a reference to Asimov in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I think this is a bunch of different. See, it's a whole bunch of. What is this?
Doesn't Asimov win the big award?
Okay, so there was. So this is from letter 294. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Asimov was actually commented on in Tolkien.
Yes.
Doesn't Asimov's book win the award over Tolkien's book or something?
I don't know. This is the only. I only find one reference in here to Asimov, so I'm jumping to that. So it's letter 294 to Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer. The Plimmers had recently interviewed Tolkien for the Daily Telegraph magazine, and had now sent him a draft of their article, the finished version of which was published in the issue of 22nd March 1968. 8th February 1967, 76 Sandfield Road, Headington, Oxford. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Plimmer, thank you for your courtesy in sending me a copy of the preliminary draft of your article. It is evident that I presented some difficulties to you during the interview. My swift speech, which is congenital and incurable, I was just talking about that, my discourtesy in walking about, and my use of a pipe, because he paces and everything, he does hold still. And he's clasped the pipe between his teeth, so that just makes it even harder to understand. My discourtesy no discourtesy was intended. I suffer from arthritis, and my knees give me pain if I sit for long. It is one alleviation of being interviewed if I can stand. I should forego smoking on these occasions, but I have found being interviewed increasingly distasteful and distracting, and need some sedative. The copy came to this address the day before I returned, hoping to get on with my proper work, and I have now found time to consider it. There are one or two points which I should prefer to see altered, and it's a few pages, and some inaccuracies and misunderstandings that have, no doubt, partly by my own fault, crept into the text. Among my characteristics that you have not mentioned is the fact that I am a pedant devoted to accuracy, even in what may appear to others unimportant matters. And his niggling. I have not had time to state these points clearly and legibly, and I hope that the revision and cutting of your article can still wait a day or two. I will try to send them off to reach you by Friday. So he sent this February 8th, and the issue came out March 22nd. Actually, February 1967 came out March 22nd, 1968. So we're assuming that got in there.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
Oh, just his perfectionistic.
Yes.
It's just amazing.
In one point, I fear that I shall disappoint you. I am informed that the Weekend Telegraph wishes to have your article illustrated by a series of pictures taken of me at work and at home. In no circumstances will I agree to being photographed again for such a purpose. I regard all such intrusions into my privacy as an impertinence, and I can no longer afford the time for it. The irritation it causes me spreads its influence over a far greater time than the actual intrusion occupies. My work needs concentration and peace of mind. Yours sincerely, J.R.R. Tolkien. The following are extracts from Tolkien's commentary, sent to Charlotte and Dennis Plummer on the draft text of their interview with him. The passages in italics are quotations from the draft. Quote, "The cramped garage that he uses as a study," end quote. May I say that it is not a study, except in domestic slang. In happier days I had one. It was a hastily contrived necessity when I was obliged to relinquish my room in college and provide a store for what I could preserve of my library. Most of the books of value have since been removed, and the most important contents are the rows of orderly files kept by my part-time secretary. She is the only regular user of the room. I have never written any literary matter in it. My present house and its location were forced on me by necessity, for few even of its furnishings afford me any pleasure. I am caught here in acute discomfort, but the dislocation of a removal and the rearrangement of my effects cannot be contemplated until I have completed my contracted work. When and if I do so, if I am still at Elf, I hope to go far away to an address that will appear in no directory or reference book. Because people were ringing on his doorbell and driving by all the time by this time. If you wonder why I received you, two courteous and charming people, in such a hole, may I say that my house has no reception room but my wife's sitting room, filled with her personal belongings. This was contemptuously described in the New Yorker by a visitor, and we both suffered ridicule and worse commiseration when this was quoted in London papers. There's a footnote for that. Since then, she has refused to admit anybody but personal friends to the room. I myself do not intend to admit anyone, certainly no photographer, to the bedsitter, where, in the company of the books that I really use and the files of unpublished material, I spend most of my days at home and do such writing as I am allowed time for. Then there's one Tolkien, tall and strongly built. I am not, in fact, tall or strongly built. I now measure 5 feet 8.5 inches and am very slightly built with notably small abs. So anyway, I'm going to skip ahead to the. So there's lots of it's several pages of quotes that he did. So it takes one line and he adds like a long paragraph or three in response.
Are we reading the letter that we're reading?
This is a letter.
Month, or we?
No, well,
or are we looking for Asimov?
This is Asimov is mentioned in this one. So this is a long, pages-long letter, and it covers a lot. C.S. Lewis covers. I mean, this is a really telling letter. Okay. Let's see here. Here's the page it's supposed to be on. So there's a reference to Dante. Okay, I don't read much now. So, quote, I don't read much now except for fairy stories, end quote. So quote, I don't read much now except for fairy stories, end quote. For except, read not even. I read quite a lot, or more truly try to read many books, notably so-called science fiction and fantasy. So he tries to read many of these that were coming out. But I seldom find any modern books that hold my attention. I suppose because I am under inner pressure to complete my own work, and because of the reasons stated in the interview, I am looking for something I can find. And so in the footnotes here we go. There are exceptions. I have read all that E.R. Edison wrote, in spite of his peculiarly bad nomenclature and personal philosophy. I was greatly taken by the book that was, I believe, the runner-up when The Lord of the Rings was given the Fantasy Award, Death of Grass. I enjoy, there's a footnote for that because I don't know what Death of Grass is. I enjoy the science fiction of Isaac Asimov. Above these, I was recently deeply engaged in the books of Mary Renault, especially the two about Theseus, The King Must Die, and The Bull from the Sea. A few days ago, I actually received a card of appreciation from her, perhaps the piece of fan mail that gives me most pleasure. So,
Asimov.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that blows my mind. As much as he spent his time avoiding the Slavic stuff and whatnot, I didn't think he would. I didn't think he would actually be on that side because he was very focused on fairy stories and he seemed to be very into mythology. And
but he always had a fascination with sci-fi here and there. He really did.
Well, I believe him and there was an obscure sci-fi novel that they both they had both read, and I can't think of the name of it right now. Brian probably would remember it if he was here, but I tried to read it, and it was, to me, it was nearly unreadable, and I don't know what the great benefits were for reading it that they both saw it. Can't remember the name of it. It was a very strange and obscure novel name. Anyways.
So that book that he referenced, the references, sheesh. Death of Grass is by John Christopher, first published 1956.
In Asimov's work, the early Android series was complete, and the core of the
Foundation trilogy, 50s to the 50s.
Was in the 50s,
right.
And he stopped, and then he finally went back and completed the Android series.
Yep.
And then did a prequel and a postquel to the Foundation
Yep.
trilogy.
Yep.
Yes.
1950 to 1982. Big jump. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So. Just no. Asimov gets a lot, as does Jules Verne and his contemporary.
But see, to me,
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells.
They both get referenced all.
H.G. Wells and Jules Verne are bigger names than Asimov in some ways, and I feel like a lot of people go back to them and they say, "Oh, well, this is Jules Verne because this is looking forward to the future and how things are going to be." And
well, Asimov, same thing. I
think Asimov was more
because he nailed it. Yeah, with reality of it,
with where technology in general was headed.
Yeah, Wells and Verne were more of that fantasy sci-fi.
Right.
And Asimov actually has been very accurate in his predictions. He was consulted. They would consult him for his idea. I have this awesome video, which has an Amiga in it, by the way.
Well, he was a
with Carl Sagan,
right?
Stephen R. Hawking, and Asimov all together talking about life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah.
This 1 hour interview from some talk show.
Well, I remember when I was younger that Asimov had come out with his own scientific encyclopedia, if I remember correctly, and the guy was brilliant. I'm not denying that, and there was some attraction to his robots, the idea of the 3 laws that was espoused in his books, but I never found a huge interest in Asimov's works.
Yeah, I'm not a big Asimov fan. I enjoy stuff well enough, but I'm not a big fan. But I meet many people who are. And so just acknowledging that just because we're in our fandom base doesn't preclude this whole other fandom
Yeah, I
base
have
having their
recently
Well, I have no doubt
been
they're
listening to
fans
the
of
Asimov books over the past 3 or 4 years, and they seem quite interesting to me.
Yeah. And they are philosophical as well as
And I'm interested
scientific.
both in the technology and the philosophy.
Right.
Fun fact about Asimov.
Please.
He is, I think, the only author, or anyway, he is an author who is published in 9 of the 10 major Dewey Decimal categories.
Oh.
So
Okay.
he has a lot of like actual
I can't believe we're
science.
talking about Asimov in
Wow.
a Tolkien Society of all
No,
things.
that's totally appropriate. Because, as I said, if there's a reference to Tolkien talking about him, 100% appropriate. And surprising for people, because people don't expect that. So I was like, no, wait a minute, I swear. Yeah. What else are you saying?
The thing that Wesley brought up earlier, this blurb says, in 1966, the Foundation trilogy by Asimov received the Hugo Award for Best All-Time Series, beating out The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Asimov himself confessed surprise at winning the award, believing, as many others, that the category had been explicitly created to honor Tolkien's work.
And you do know, because being at Worldcon, I was a speaker on a bunch of panels at Worldcon a few years ago. The Hugo Award is totally a fan club, like you're a member of whatever, right? Like right now there's like 10,000 members or something, and it is completely driven by just those members.
Right.
And back during, it keep like the whole sad puppy, angry puppy, all this. It's all this politicization of the sci-fi writers not being enough different ethnic minorities or genders and all these things. So there was a big politicization of it in recent years, and so you started having so people nominate their favorite books, and then it gets voted down and voted up, and it's kind of like Reddit. It's really, I guess, a modern example would be that the Hugo Awards are the Reddit of science fiction fantasy awards, which is not a compliment in my book.
I like that they had to have read it in order to upvote or downvote books for the Hugo Awards.
That'd be nice if that was true.
Well,
yeah.
the man that influenced both C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, that I feel like he had a huge portion in Tolkien's love of mythology, along with his language, was Chesterton. And Chesterton had a friendship with H.G. Wells, but he had a tendency to not really endorse the science fiction view of things, but he encouraged a very interesting philosophical view of the pagan myths that I believe that was taken up by both C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, that ended up leading Tolkien to take the fairy stories and turn them into the stuff that we see as the Lord of the Rings. There's a huge portion of his apologist. He was an apologist during his time, an editor for one of the English papers. This mentor that C.S. Lewis said it influenced him significantly, and which Tolkien has made some comments that are so close to what Chesterton said that it seems that he almost took a page from his book at times. So, to me, I'm always amazed by Tolkien's enjoyment of science fiction, being that it seemed that his philosophy was mythology.
So the DVD I was referencing, sorry, I was wrong, it's not Asimov, forgive me. Arthur C. Clarke. That's why, okay. So, my mistake. But it is a very interesting video. It's Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, and Arthur C. Clarke interviewed in, when is this? It's got to be the 80s. But anyway, it's on God, the universe, and everything else. But my mistake. And I've done that. I've confused Clarke and Asimov in my head a number of times here. But it's...
You're forgiven of that.
Because he goes into fractals and such and demonstrates zooming into fractals with a Amiga 2000. Because it was the only computer at the time that could do that kind of rendering without having a big mainframe or something. So, but that is another one, is Clarke as well. That's a little later, but... Okay, so let's see, 225, okay. You want to continue that reading, or do we want to do our monthly letter?
Well, it's up to you. I think that he gets into some more philosophical things at the end of his book about how it influenced him. I felt like the first half of it, the funnier part of it, describing his contact with the young boy and stuff, was more appropriate.
That was the part you wanted to emphasize.
Than getting into the Christian theology that he kind of wants to talk about a little bit at the end of the book. I think that maybe that's veering off a little bit too much. So.
Okay. So, anybody remember what the last letter was that we read? We're in the 140s, 150s? I know we're in the 140s at least. Okay. I'm thinking
140 is in June.
Okay. So a few from
July, visitor read 141.
Okay. assuming you read 142 and 143, I believe, which were 142 was Father Robert Murray.
Right, we discovered he was the grandson of the guy who started the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary.
And 143 from a letter to Rainer Unwin about Book 3 in the first half of Volume 2. And then 144 is a long letter, pages long, which includes discussion of Elvish and such and the different types of Elvish. Well, we've just been linking this up today, haven't we? But it is a long letter. It's not quite as long as the letter, but it's up there. So 144, to Naomi Mitchison. Mrs. Mitchison had been reading page proofs of the first 2 volumes of Lord of the Rings and wrote to Tolkien with a number of questions about the book. April 25th, 1954. Dear Mrs. Mitchison, it has been both rude and ungrateful of me not to have acknowledged or to have thanked you for past letters, gifts, and remembrances. All the more so, since your interest has, in fact, been a great comfort to me, an encouragement in the despondency that not unnaturally accompanies the labors of actually publishing such a work as The Lord of the Rings. But it is most unfortunate that this has coincided with a period of exceptionally heavy labors and duties and other functions, so that I have been at times almost distracted. I will try and answer your questions. I may say that they are very welcome. I like things worked out in detail myself, and answers provide to all reasonable questions. Your letter will, I hope, guide me in choosing the kind of information to be provided as promised in an appendix, and strengthen my hand with the publishers. Back to the Silmarillion argument. Since the 3rd volume will be rather slimmer than the 2nd, events move quicker and less explanations are needed. There will, I believe, be a certain amount of room for such matter. My problem is not the difficulty of providing it, but of choosing from the mass of material I have already composed. There is, of course, a clash between literary technique and the fascination of elaborating in detail an imaginary mythical age. Mythical, not allegorical. My mind does not work allegorically. It always emphasizes that. And the whole point is every time everybody sees like a Christian viewpoint or World War II viewpoint or whatever, he just says applicability rather than allegory. And that's what makes it a more timeless piece. You can see, you can apply your viewpoint to all the different aspects because it has that human experience throughout. And so you can keep looking for ways that it applies to your viewpoint.
Well, that was what I was saying. The integrity of the work was so great that it was making an impression, and even though it wasn't philosophically, I mean, obviously it came from a Catholic viewpoint.
Well,
but it
came
wasn't
from a Catholic viewpoint. That
right.
doesn't mean he wrote it that way.
Right, but I mean, it wasn't something that was explicitly hammered into the reader.
Right. As a story, I think it is good that there should be a lot of things unexplained, especially if an explanation actually exists. And I have perhaps from this point of view erred in trying to explain too much and give too much past history. Many readers have, for instance, rather stuck at the Council of Elrond. And even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one, intentionally. But as much further history backwards as anyone could desire actually exists in the Silmarillion, and related stories and poems composing the history of the Eldar, elves. I believe that in the event, which seems much to hope, of sufficient people being interested in The Lord of the Rings to pay for the cost of its publication, the gallant publishers may consider printing some of that. It was actually written first, and I wished to have the matter issued in historical order, which would have saved a lot of allusion and explanation in the present book, but I could not get it accepted, as we've read through multiple times. The 3rd volume was, of course, completed years ago, as far as the tale goes. I have finished such revision as seemed necessary, and it will go to be set up almost at once. In the meanwhile,
Just that it's set up almost at once, but not true.
In the meanwhile, yeah, what's the date on this? 1954?
Oh, it's getting there.
Yeah. In the meanwhile, I'm giving what fragments of time I have to making compressed versions of such historical, ethnographical, and linguistic matter as can go in the appendix. And not a whole lot of fantasy books do that, all of those above. If it will interest you, I will send you a copy, rather rough, of the matter dealing with languages and writing, peoples and translation. The latter is given much thought. It seems seldom regarded by other creators of imaginary worlds, however gifted as narrators, such as Edison. But then I am a philologist, and much though I should like to be more precise on other cultural aspects and features, this is not within my competence. Anyway, language is the most important. This is good, boy, we're nailing it today just by luck. For the story has to be told in a dialogue conducted in a language, but English cannot have been the language of any people at that time. What I have, in fact, done is to equate the Westron or widespread common speech of the Third Age with English, and translate everything, including names such as the Shire, that was in the Westron into English terms, with some differentiation of style to represent dialectal differences. I almost had an extra syllable there. Languages quite alien to the CS have been left alone. To the CS?
Common speech.
Oh, right. Thank you for saying. Except for a few scraps in the black speech of Mordor, and a few names and a battle cry in Dwarvish, these are almost entirely Elvish, Eldarin. Languages, however, that were related to the Westron presented a special problem. I turned them into forms of speech related to English, since the Rohirrim are represented as recent comers out of the north, and users of an archaic Mannish language relatively untouched by the influence of Eldarin. I have turned their names into forms like but not identical with Old English. The language of Dale and the Long Lake would, if it appeared, be represented as more or less Scandinavian in character. But it is only represented by a few names, especially those of the dwarves that came from that region. These are all Old Norse dwarf names. By the way, that's how they got around copyright trademark issues in some of the games, is they use those Old Norse dwarf names instead of his original names, because they were still accurate, even though that is how they got around some of the limitations of the license. Dwarves are represented as keeping their own native tongue more or less secret and using for all outer purposes the language of the people they dwelt near. They never reveal their own true personal names in their own tongue. I think he references that dwarves, in a lot of ways, he equates to Jewish culture and such, or Jewish people and such. You want to continue from there?
From there?
There.
I'll just pass
Okay.
it. I don't want to.
All right. Challenge by choice.
Okie dokie. The Westron, or common speech, is supposed to be derived from the Mannish Adunaic language of the Númenóreans, spreading from the Númenórean kingdoms in the days of the kings, and especially from Gondor, where it remains spoken in nobler and rather more antique style, a style also usually adopted by the elves when they use this language. But all the names in Gondor, except for a few of supposedly prehistoric origin, are of Elvish form, since the Númenórean nobility still used an Elvish language, or could. This was because they had been allies of the elves of the First Age, and had for that reason been granted the Atlantis Isle of Númenor. Two of the Elvish tongues appear in the book. They have some sort of existence, since I have composed them in some completeness, as well as their history and account of their relationship. They are intended A, to be definitely of a European kind in style and structure, not in detail, and B, to be specially pleasant. The former is not difficult to achieve, but the latter is more difficult, since individuals' personal predilections, especially in the phonetic structure of languages, varies widely, even when modified by the imposed languages, including their so-called native tongue. I have therefore pleased myself. Not about writing the book, but about creating the language. So the archaic language of lore is meant to be a kind of Elven Latin, and by transcribing it into a spelling closely resembling that of Latin, except that Y is only used as a consonant, as Y in English, yes. The similarity to Latin has been increased ocularly. Actually, it might be said to be composed on a Latin basis with two other main ingredients that happen to give me a phonoaesthetic pleasure. Finnish, and Greek. It is, however, less consonantal than any of the three. This language is High Elven, or in its own terms, Kenya Elvish. Quenya Elvish. The living language of the Western Elves, Sindarin or Grey Elven, is the one usually meant, especially in names. This is derived from an origin common to it and Quenya. But the changes have been deliberately devised to give it a linguistic character very like, though not identical with, British Welsh. Because that character is one that I find in some linguistic moods very attractive, and because it seems to fit the rather Celtic type of legends and stories told of its speakers. Elves is a translation, not perhaps very suitable, but originally good enough, of Gwendi. They are represented as a race similar in appearance, and more so the further back, to men, and in former days of the same stature. I will not here go into their differences from men, but I suppose that the Gwendi are in fact, in these histories, very little akin to the elves and fairies of Europe. And if I were pressed to rationalize, I should say that they represent really men with greatly enhanced aesthetic and creative faculties, greater beauty and longer life, and nobility. The elder children doomed to fade before the followers, men, and to live ultimately only by the thin line of their blood that was mingled with that of men, among whom it was the only real claim to nobility. They are represented as having become early divided into two, or three varieties. One, the Eldar, who heard the summons of the Valar or powers to pass from Middle-earth over the sea to the west. And two, the Lesser Elves, who did not answer it. Most of the Eldar, after a great march, reached the western shores and passed over sea. These were the High Elves, who became immensely enhanced in powers and knowledge. But part of them in the event remained in the coastlands of the northwest. These were the Sindar, or Grey Elves. The Lesser Elves hardly appear, except as part of the people of the Elf realm. Of northern...
Yeah, it is like 9 branches at one point.
Well, the question is why is, who's he writing to right now?
It's a person who got to read an early manuscript of his work in Lord of the Rings.
So he's like he's rehashing the Silmarillion because they have no clue what...
Well, right, because he hasn't created the appendices yet, and he has all these references to these languages and dates and events in the book that aren't explained. So he's trying to explain so that this will become the appendices.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing in some ways because his desire for language almost makes him kind of a kind of sociologist here in some ways too, because he's creating different what do you want to call it, different
sociocultural
differences.
Yeah.
Which helps him later, obviously, when he gets into the story, delving into it.
So, I'll probably just read another paragraph or two. Okay, so the Lesser Elves hardly appear except as part of the people of the Elf realm. Northern Mirkwood and of Lorien ruled by Eldar, their languages do not appear. The High Elves men into Bookar exiles, returned back over sea to Middle-earth, after events which are the main matter of the Silmarillion, part of one of the main kindreds of the Eldar. Noldor, and is pronounced as Ding, masters of lore, or rather a last remnant. For the Silmarillion proper in the First Age ended with the destruction of the primeval dark power, of whom Sauron was a mere lieutenant, and the rehabilitation of the exiles who returned again overseas. Those who lingered were those who were enamored of Middle-earth and yet desired the unchanging beauty of the land of the Valar, hence the making of the rings. For the 3 rings were precisely endowed with the power of preservation, not of birth, though unsullied because they were not made by Sauron nor touched by him. They were nonetheless partly products of his instruction, and ultimately under the control of the One. Thus, as you will see, when the One goes, the last defenders of high elven lore and beauty are shorn of power to hold back time and depart.
So we're saying that the golden realm of Galadriel was being held together by the ring she carried.
Right. Well, her force of will with the ring.
I didn't realize that when Mordor, I mean the ring, that essentially the ring that she had lost power.
Yep.
And so essentially her realm in Middle Earth
Would no longer be able to hold back.
I didn't realize that, because
and that's why she finally agreed to go back to Valinor. Remember, she did go to Valinor.
I always thought that the three people who had the rings, because he had the boat guy, the guy who made the boats, Cirion, and then Gandalf, and then Galadriel. Those were the three rings.
Well, Gandalf was given the ring by Cirion, wasn't it?
I don't know, but my point is the three ring bearers, they have the power of the ring is now taken from them. I didn't realize that was. I always just thought they took the rings with them when they went.
No, well,
across
they still have the rings, but they don't.
Amon.
Yeah, they don't have the effect that they had.
Right. I guess my point is that the difference is that I didn't realize it was having an effect. I mean that they lost the power of the ring.
That's why both Elrond and Galadriel talked about that. This ring, if you succeed, it seals our doom, because we will no longer be able to hold on to what our little snippets of Arda or of Valinor. We won't be able to hold on to anymore because we will lose that power as well. So it's a double-edged blade in your success. If you succeed in destroying the ring, we lose our power. And remember, Galadriel always had a lot of guilt about going back to Valinor, and she was told time and time again she was forgiven, but she didn't feel forgiven in her own heart for what had happened with the kinslaying back at the Tellerine. So when they were leaving after the defiling of the trees by Shelob and Ungoliant and Morgoth, and the stealing of the Silmarils from Feanor, so the revenge, the curse of Feanor and all that. So a bunch of Noldor broke off and went in pursuit, and the Valar said, "Don't do this, get back here, or else." And Feanor, being proud and everything, like, "Screw you, I'm going to do what I want, and I don't need to."
If they really wanted it, or else they could have done it, but they
so Mandos gave them the doom of Mandos, that whatsoever you do will be, corrupted. All of your good intentions from because this is after they burned the ships of Tellerine and slew their own kin. It's like, going forward from here, everything you do will
right, but I don't think that curse was put on them by the Valar. I think that comes directly from the higher up. The higher up. I think it's higher than Mandos. I think it's just given the power to do so. But I think the curse is bigger than just Valar putting it on the elves. Anyways, but it's amazing that the power is in some ways that the power of the elves is flourishing because of the shadow of Mordor. Is essentially the idea.
Well,
the existence of the ring.
Linked, yeah.
The existence of the ring is producing a essentially its own rebellion, I guess you could say, or something that's firmly planted in Middle Earth to stand against against Mordor. That's kind of interesting.
It's a little bit of a sword of Damocles, hanging over them. All right, if they change the status quo, things fall apart. It comes down on them. They bring the doom down on themselves, but they also bring on Sauron. They lose their power. They lose their ability to hold back time, to hold and preserve things, unless they go back to Valinor. And again, Galadriel has incredible guilt about what happened with the Tellerine and kinslaying and all of that. Even though she's told time and time again, "No, you've been forgiven. Please come back." Until she's able to forgive herself, she's not going to do that. Then finally, at the end of the book, with Frodo and the others, they do take the Grey-Haven ship back across the seas. But it's not until then. Galadriel's been there for thousands of years.
Well, didn't she get exile? But it's referred to as fading, and so and she even
says, once the ring.
She implies to Frodo that by not taking the ring, she's settling for fading.
Right. Because
or becoming less than she was with the ring.
Because her ring and Elrond's ring will lose the power to hold back the fading that she's afraid of. Because all around Middle Earth, the elves are fading. But Lorien and Rivendell are bastions because of the power of their rings and their own will. And with the loss of that power of the rings, Lorien will no longer be preserved, and she will fade. And if she stays here in Middle-earth, she will fade. The only way she can hold on to that is to go back to Valinor.
Is that why so when she says like, oh, I passed the test and doesn't take the ring, is that when she's like, yes, I feel like I can go back now?
Yeah,
right.
She realizes that,
okay.
because it was a test of would she succumb to the pride and greed and fear of fading that so many other Noldor before her had succumbed, or that even the men had succumbed with Isildur and such. That if you look back to the lineage of the Noldor, and elves time and time again were corrupted by Morgoth and later Sauron, and tempted by power, and tempted in kin strifes and wars with each other, and wars with the dwarves over the Nagra and the necklace and such, and the wars with themselves over the Silmarils, and just all of these things because of arrogance and pride and greed and fear of losing what they're holding on to. And so finally, it seems like she reaches a level of acceptance that it's whatever happens with the fate of this, either there'll be a last battle against Sauron and they'll die in battle, or if they succeed, it's time to go. One way or the other, it's time to go, in one form or another. Whether it's the halls of Mandos or across the seas to Valinor.
I kind of lost track, but when the ring is offered to her, Frodo offers the ring, and she talks about how she's greatly desired it. The temptation is that she wants it for the preservation, and maybe even the expansion of that preservation. And the other option is like we've already talked about, was that she would be less than what she was then.
Right.
In some ways. It's kind
And
of
if she did accept the ring, she would be both great and terrible, because the ring would corrupt everything she did, because she would continue the curse, and then some, of the Noldor, right? Because of the whole reason the Noldor were there was because of the Silmarils, and the curse of the Silmarils. I mean, all of this goes back. That's why Tolkien said you need the Silmarillion. All of it goes back. Everything is tainted by the Silmarils. And so all of her deeds, etc., and no matter how, and just like Gandalf said, no matter how good their intentions, if they took the ring unto themselves, all their works would be corrupted, and they would be doomed to just become another Dark Lord one way or another, even if they meant well. So whether through the power of the ring or just through the temptation of that kind of power, the subjugation of the will of others. That's what the ring does.
The desire, though, all the desires that she had were good, and that's the reason why it was so tempting,
right,
for her to take the ring.
And Gandalf too.
And so, like you said, she passed the test, and so she must. I don't know. Maybe she didn't feel. Maybe she didn't feel the guilt that she once did, because she didn't feel like she gave in. She didn't give in to that moment where she could.
It was a defining moment in her character that she resisted the temptation.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rehash it. It just there was a momentary thought, and it flew away, and I was hoping to stir it up once again, but it didn't seem to come back.
I should say that they represent really men with greatly enhanced aesthetic, creative faculties, greater beauty, and longer life and nobility. The elder children doomed to fade before the followers, men, and to live ultimately only by the thin line of their blood, which is mingled with that of men, among whom it was their only real claim to, quote, nobility. So the elves don't have nobility.
Or did he mean the nobility of men through the elvish blood?
Correct.
Yeah, because the Númenórean line,
yes,
from the Elros,
so that's,
the line of Elros.
That's an interesting concept of, men.
Although he may have meant, in that context it makes sense. But remember, there were the 3 tribes of men that fought against Morgoth.
Yeah.
So you had the Woses, who were the noble primitive, right? The noble savage, the concept of his time period, of Tolkien's time generation. So the Woses were the noble savage, and then the house of Huron and Huron Bjor, something like that. Anyway, the three houses of men.
Yeah.
And the only ones who are the only race that has never been corrupted are the Woses, the Druidine. They never succumb to the dark side in any way, shape, or form in any of Tolkien's writing. Ever.
The Woses?
The Woses, the Druidine. Gonberry gone?
Gonberry gone, yeah.
Well, but he...
There's a whole bunch of history about them in the Silmarillion. They were on Numenor and left shortly before the fall because the earth felt unsteady beneath their feet and they were having premonitions of the doom of Numenor because it was all, and it was becoming corrupted.
Right, but there's, to Tolkien, at least this is always the way it's been for me, is from my understanding is that there's kind of this mystery about the origin of man, where man exactly came from, that Tolkien kind of leaves open, and partially because of his Catholic upbringing, the curse of sin, or whatever you want to call it, was already in place when the men entered into Middle Earth. His story of Silmarillion and the Middle Earth, there were noble men, but there was still a curse there. So even though they left Numenor, the men were still considered cursed. Yes, they were noble. They were the noble, like you said, the noble.
What are you referring to for the beginning of men? I don't know what you're referencing.
Because he leaves it absent. He does not. The origin of men is kind of like they pop up in the middle of the Silmarillion without a very big description about how they were created or where they came from or whatnot. That's because Tolkien already kind of feels like the origin of man there is kind of
well, and I'm not even thinking about the origin of man as much as I'm thinking of the origin of the concept of nobility within the UK construct.
Right, yeah.
Look,
Manifest
some watery
destiny
tart throwing scimitars.
Right. So, Long's a scimitar. He was not the right. Excalibur, or I mean, Monty Python.
Yes.
I just think from Tolkien's worldview, it's really hard to say that they weren't under the curse even though he didn't produce it in the manuscript itself as a thing. He saw every part of man as being affected by some form of tendency to be broken ruins, I guess you could call them.
Well, there's the descent from glory, the yesteryear, past years, every civilization is in decline in his setting. Yeah. Whether it's the elves, men, dwarves, whatever, they're all, in the past they were much more powerful, and steady decline of all of them. Mm-hmm. I don't know that Tolkien, the only race that Tolkien actually goes into detail about their creation is the dwarves.
No,
both elves
and the elves and the dwarves were very descriptively dealt with, and we know that the orcs are merely elves that have been twisted by.
No, we don't know that. That's one of three things he put out there to intentionally make people. Yeah. He never definitively answered that. He intentionally said, well, it could be this, or it could be this.
The corruption of the elves is very clear in the manuscript, but I'm sorry, but I have to take the stance that from a Catholic viewpoint, that mankind is always tainted by original sin, and I'm not even a Catholic, and I don't even buy into original sin, but that's his viewpoint, and I think that that's something that you couldn't say about his work, that he would not assume that even the barbarians were affected by it. Now, were they influenced hugely by it? Was it seen in the manuscript? No, because I don't think that knowing that much about the Woses was extremely important to Tolkien's story. Yeah. So
I don't see it that way at all. The doom of men is the gift of death. That's what's. I mean, he hammers on that over and over and over. But that's the gift of the Ilúvatar to men, is is death, as opposed to with elves and such.
Yeah.
And there's no. The problem is men succumb easily to the fear and malice of Morgoth early on, coming from the east. And so, like, I wrote modules on the early formations of all the Mannish races and such, so I really delved deeply into this time period and the early foundations of all the different Mannish races. And you had those that were easily corrupted, but I didn't find any references indicating that any more than the elves, because the elves are easily corrupted.
I'm not denying that there's any references. I'm saying that he made that the reason why he never delved into the origin of man, which is, I mean, he seemed to deal with the origin of the elves more than he dealt with the origin of man. And the origin of the elves and how the elves were corrupted was dealt with in very high detail in the Silmarillion.
So were men.
But the men came along later, and we don't. There's a portion there of they didn't just wake up next to the river or whatever. We're not even given the idea that they came into consciousness. They just entered into history that the elves knew of, and we don't know where they came from or
they came from the east.
Well, they came from the east, but beyond the vague notion of where they came from, compared to the elves, he didn't discuss their origin or their beginnings to the detail.
He did. He has, throughout all of the histories of Middle Earth and such, he's gone into a lot of detail, and about how they became more and more fearful, and how some became more subjected and joined to the forces of Morgoth, and others refused to join and fought against that. And then, later when the Númenóreans, after the three tribes in the battle against Morgoth, went to Númenor and were isolated from Middle Earth, and Middle Earth fell back into shadow again under the fear of Morgoth, and the Númenóreans came back as the gift bringers back to Middle Earth and started to raise up the Mannish races again. He goes into elaborate detail from the very beginning of the different tribes all the way through. And
we'll just have to agree to disagree about the Moses then, because I don't see anything. I don't see anything in his worldview that would support that. But
yeah, read the Druidine. I pulled up every Druidine because I specifically done whole pieces on just the Druidine and the Moses, and they're the one. The Ents corrupted, the Elves corrupted, men corrupted, dwarves corrupted. The only ones that didn't corrupt were the subset of men, which were the Woses, the Druidine. They never, ever served Morgoth or in any way gave into the dark side. Every other species of the free peoples, with their choice of free will, have examples of going dark side and those who resisted. But a Druidine, there's not one instance of it.
Right, but serving Morgoth in a literal sense.
In any way.
Serving
in any way. I'm the Druidine.
I guess I need to read a little bit just to be educated on exactly. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the terms here, but we'll just have to leave that at disagreement.
I think it's an interesting topic. So thank you. So it is 2:59. Any last comments before we wrap up?
I had a dream that I was a hobbit last night.
Nice.
That's all.
Nice. Yeah. How was that?
I don't remember much.
Oh, was it just relaxing and pleasant?
No.
No, not so much?
I was just short, mostly, was the issue. That's all. I didn't even get to eat a bunch of meals.
Oh.
Yeah.
You found your feet didn't fit on the floor when you sat in your chair? And
I didn't sit in my dream, but maybe I will have a continuation of the dream and I'll let you know.
Do let us know. That's great. Anything else?
I'm embarrassed if that's the last thing that's said. Someone said
something. Well, so of course we meet on the third Saturday of each month. TolkienScholars.org. Twitter is twitter.com/Tolkien Scholars. On YouTube.com/Tolkien Scholars. Our email is TolkienScholars@gmail.com. I hope Brian is well, and I hope Richard gets well soon. I'm sorry they weren't able to join us this time. Those of you who watch this later, you can always catch all of the videos going back, I think, about 10 years now of these meeting videos on our YouTube channel and to our website. So, and we're still just at letter, was that 144 we just got partway through? We didn't quite finish that, right?
Correct.
No,
Yeah.
we're just in the middle.
About halfway. So yeah, we've been reading at least one letter, although there was the letter which took several
Yes.
months to get through. And we've done readings of Farmer Giles and others that have also. But yeah, we've been doing this about, I think, a little over 10 years now. Just these broadcast meetings, not counting the meetings with Roy broadcast them. So I'm glad we're.
It's your
chugging
perseverance.
along. Yeah, well, everybody. I mean, I was sick there for a couple of years, and I mean, really sick. And Brian and Richard helped keep it going, and so we really thank you for all of you showing up and engaging and having nice civil literary debate, and you know, this is civil discourse, right? And we're able to. There's no personal attacks or anything else, and we can have disagreement and do so in a nice civilized way. And there's very few forums that do that anymore. So, so thank you all very much. Thank you online, and wherever you may be well, Namarie.
Did anyone take notes?
Well, the video.